Hello and welcome to another edition of Community Forum. My name is Joseph Feaster, and I am fortunate today to have two other gentlemen with me who are helping to make this program happen. One is my fellow Community Forum co-host, Steve Kelley, and a new addition to our conversation today, Norman Katz. Norm, what we want to talk about today is we feel is a very interesting topic because we had an opportunity, Steve and me, we had an opportunity 4 years ago in order to discuss the 100 days of then President Donald Trump. Well, we want to do the same this year to talk about what has been the success or failures of the 100 days of President Joe Biden. And as I indicated, with me today are Steve Kelley and Norm Katz. And I know that most of you know Steve and me because we've been on this program for a number of years, but we'd like to introduce you to Norm Katz. So, gentlemen, I want to say good morning to you both, and then I want to turn it over to you, Norm, to introduce yourself to our audience. So,
good morning,
gentlemen.
Good morning to our forum here. My name is Norm Katz, and I have been on this program before with Roy, interviewing various people and as a public speaker. I come from the Continuity of Government program at the White House. I served during the administrations of John F. Kennedy and Lyndon Baines Johnson back in the 60s, where things were obviously very different than they were today. The Continuity of Government program means that if the President of the United States is incapacitated due to a nuclear holocaust at the time, a natural disaster, or an untimely death, we swing into action so that the government of the United States continues. I served as military attaché to Chief Jim Rowley of the United States Secret Service and the director of the CIA, John McCone. And I still do some background work for the CIA, even at my tender age of 83. As long as I'm still, quote, dealing with a full deck, and I have to be checked on that a couple of times a year, and it's important because you don't want to do anything that's harmful to someone or say something that's out of line. Things are quite different today. And what's interesting is back in the early 60s, as far as the Secret Service is concerned, there were only 312 agents in the 60s, all men. Today, there were well over 7,000, including men and women. And it has changed. Race relations have changed. A lot of things have changed for the better in most instances. And, you know, I find some things that are questionable, and I'm pretty outspoken. And I try to tell it the way it was and tell how I think about what's going on in this country. And many folks in my generation are closed-minded. They still remember the days. I remember Martin Luther King. I remember the marches. I remember Georgia. I remember Alabama. I remember the dogs. And I remember how they treated people. And that just bothered me to no end. You know, there for the grace of God go I. We're all human beings. And our life on this planet, considering, is very, very, very short. It's not a dress rehearsal. We're going to be dead for a long time. So do unto others as you would like to have done, you know, to yourself.
Well, Norm, let me just, as you can see, the photograph that I have behind me is exactly, that's Ruby Bridges, the one who was escorted during the time of JFK's presidency to school by those marshals. And I know you were in the CIA, but, you know, along with Steve, I want us to, why don't we start talking about it? And I want to say first and foremost, thank you for your service then and now in serving in government. You know, I have the highest regard for persons who will give public service. But
thank you.
We had talked offline, and we talked about the first 100 days of President Biden, but we have to start before that. I think an event occurred on January 6th in terms of the storming of the Capitol, which was most unusual, and I'm certain for you, being where you've served in government, and just the, I mean, I stood there stunned watching that event take place. Let's start there. We have to start on January 6th, and then we'll get to January 20th and beyond. So I'd like for you and Steve to both comment about the what has now been coined the insurrection at the Capitol on January 6th. So Norm, Steve, I'm pass it to you.
Whoever, Steve, go ahead, because I spoke.
Actually, no, I think that your take on it is perhaps more prescient in that it certainly you brought us a comparative note from the JFK assassination to what was going on in the country then to what is going on now. How does that compare?
Well, in my opinion, it was one of the worst things that could ever happen to this country. I mean, this is a democracy. Why did it happen? What were these people trying to prove? You know, there were good people on either side. There was not good people on either side. There were some good people, not everyone, not everyone. And this was a disaster. For them to move forward and batter with police batons and the gases, you know, that they use, the sprays, a bear spray, what have you, in the faces. And I think since then, 2 officers had died because of that original thing. 2 officers from the Capitol Police took their lives, suicide after that. And look how close they came to sit there with a Confederate flag. And Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker of the House, in her office. And the foolishness that they tried, you know, to complete a lynching, God forbid, of the Vice President of the United States, take over that office. Someone was shot. I mean, it was unbelievable. While President Trump at the time egged them on. And I watched the speaker last night who was there stating that, well, my president told me to do this and I follow him instinctively. That is why I went to Washington, D.C., you know, to the Capitol as part of that insurrection. And what a mistake I made. That happened to be on just last night. And I watched him. And he's sitting where I was sitting. I must like reach through the TV and give him a slap on the side of the head. What good did that do? How did our country benefit from those particular actions?
Well, Norm, let me just ask you this, and I want Steve to get in this conversation as well. I mean, over the years, starting from George Washington, we've had a peaceful transfer of power. That in terms of what each president would pass it on, whether it was from one party to the other, there has never been a situation of a non-peaceful transfer of power. So this was, you know, out of sorts, so to speak, for this in order to happen. And since you have been involved in some of the investigating of what transpired on January 6th, what has been uncovered? What had, if you can speak about it, certainly, what has been uncovered about this, of what brought this about, how it had been handled? Because as I sat there and watched it, I thought there was much complicity by many in allowing this to happen. And, you know, but that's my suspicions just based upon from where I sit and observed it. What did you uncover, and if you can speak about it?
Well, there were several people to date. We have managed to get 400 people continue the investigation, and once they're all indicted, it's going to be forever. I was part of, it got 2 here on Cape Cod, and those have not been indicted yet. But once you take a picture of yourself and you share it with someone and you're smiling and you think it's just so wonderful of what you've done following, you know, the advice of your president and his cohort, Rudy Giuliani, his advisor, who is now in trouble himself. for various things he did. It doesn't put this country in a good light. Look at those who support the police, those who are against the police. Those guys, those police officers put their lives on the line. And as I said, two took their lives afterwards from PTSD, and two were killed because of those particular riots. Yet they're claiming that their police are wonderful. We need more guns. We need more this. We need more that. And the police officers, the Capitol Police, the DC Metropolitan Police, and those had the common sense not to draw their weapons, while they're being crushed in the doorway, sprayed, beaten by, batons. They held the line, and some of them even led them away from certain officers. I mean, this was just an incredible thing. While the Trump, family, they watched with glee. It was obvious. They said it. And I'm not putting words in anyone's mouth. They enjoyed watching that disaster, and how sad it was for this country. Never in our history has anyone attacked our capital, in our seat of democracy.
Well,
if I could step in a little,
yeah.
I think that this the world we live in is very complex, and I think we sort of owe it to ourselves to untangle this a little bit more than what we see in quick actions or lack of actions by anyone.
Yeah.
And for instance, when your shoes are tied in a knot, you don't get anywhere if you just keep pulling the ends, right? And I feel like we're just pulling the ends if we don't look a little deeper and find what is the root to the way people are thinking, which is controlling their actions. And so I'm sort of pushing back as a devil's advocate. No, I'm not saying anything you said is out of the way, but rather to say, like, where do we untie this knot? How do we look at how people had arranged their thinking that to put themselves in these positions that they now regret, as you point out, they're going to have their name forever on people's lists in the FBI and the CIA, whatever. So I think that and this will be controversial, I got to pull the schools in and say, how are we teaching people to think so that when they look at a situation that they have an analytical view to what is transpiring, and not a biased or political view, or a view of less responsibility than they probably now regret. In other words, if you can do something and say, my president told me, or this person, it doesn't matter, this person or that person told me. And I think we used to talk about if everybody's on a bridge and they tell you to jump, do you jump because someone else did? And
exactly. You're right on. But that's what he said last night on TV to millions of people.
Okay, but yes, I understand what you're saying. And I guess what I'm trying to draw a little deeper is to find out how people are getting to their conclusions, and what perhaps how is culture affecting them, and how is that culture and we can bring in multiple topics. I mean, you've got unemployment, deficit, COVID, racism. There are so many things going on that are affecting the cultural and political discourse. So let me just kind of throw that over to you, Joe, to kind of comment on sort of my wish that we untangle this a little more.
Well, Steve, I mean, you have always been thoughtful, and that's the author in you and the writer in you, for sure, and your concerns about society. So I hear you explicitly on that, but I have to come back and, I will respond to your inquiry, but I also want to come back because of the training and experience that Norm has. From my view, folks were brainwashed over the past 5 years. And that's what has been evident if you look at the past 5 years to bring you to what transpired on January 6th. where people were believing in the fact that, remember, the conversation started, the election was going to be thrown, that the election, that people are taking our what's rightfully ours. So when you had the conspiracy theories, and particularly what was out there in social media, people began to believe they were drinking the Kool-Aid. And so therefore they reacted to it. And then, as Norm pointed out, you put gasoline and then you lit the fuse on January 6th and directed folks down there. So I think that's it. But I think where we might want to go is, let's talk about January 20th with the new administration and how they attempted to respond. The investigation on what transpired on January 6th is going to occur. Hopefully that they have a commission that will study that, and we'll find out more, and we'll be able to get to some of what you're talking about. But as you can see, Steve, you see what's going on now. You see what's going on in the so-called Republican Party. You're seeing what's going on with regards to QAnon. You're seeing all of these things. We're not out of the woods yet on the so-called bifurcation or worse within society right now here in the United States. So stay tuned. But let's see if we can move towards some of the things in a positive sense that we're done. You talked about economy, you talked about COVID. Let's talk about some of those things that the Biden administration has addressed since they're taking over January 20th. We have the family relief bill. We have let's talk about those, and let's give our community forum, Mark, a grade on what are some of those. So why don't we go there, Norm?
Right, Joe, just let me say one thing. In my years as a voting individual, and I voted in every election, I voted both sides of the aisle. Both sides of the aisle. I voted for Reagan. I voted for George Bush Sr. I was asked to serve as Undersecretary of Health and Human Services in the Reagan administration, and I respectfully declined because my wife and we just didn't want to go back to Washington again. It was a total different life there, and I vote for the person usually, and not for the party. But I see, as Steve alluded to, such a deep decline now in the Republican Party. They don't know what to do. The old guard is off track. It's these young kids, I call them, coming in. One of them was wearing a gun into the House meeting. I forget the two women, their names. I mean, it's a different world, and I get frustrated. But you have to, it's their world, not mine. I'm on the other end of the bell curve. And if you look when Biden, in his inauguration, the shame that the sitting president did not appear, for the changing of the guard. And this is going to go on and on and on. Every 4 years, we'll have a different president, or what have you. And it's a slap in the face and an insult, to many people. And it does not send a good face of our country out to the world. Now, we wanted to start with what good has Biden done? And, I don't want to take up everyone's time.
Yeah. Well, I like Steve. Let's walk through some of the things, because, like I said, we'll probably need several programs. There's a lot. If we just stayed on the topic that Steve has raised, and maybe we should say to talk about the culture that is taking place in the lack of civility, the lack of understanding, the lack of accepting of somebody else's views. That's what Steve. That's what you're talking about. And the question that you're raising is, how can we get this? So before we move into, I don't think we can walk away from what you've laid on the table there, Steve. And I think we ultimately will get to the 100 days. But why don't you elaborate a little bit more on what you have in mind by what you're seeing, or what you would do as far as the anecdote in order to address that.
So one of my favorite quotes is by the Persian poet, 13th century. I think his name is Rumi, R-U-M-I, and he said, "Somewhere out there, beyond right and wrong, there is a field, and I will meet you there." And
Yeah.
having that as a base allows us to honor humility instead of hubris. And I'm finding in many of the observations, the social media, everything is so much hubris, so much of I'm so smart, I know how I can tell you what to do. And I would like to go on record with humility right now and say that I have trouble running my own life. I'm not going to tell you how to run yours. And I think that what we're seeing is the opposite of that in society, where it seems everyone has this advanced opinion about what other people should be doing with their lives. And I don't know about you guys, but running our lives in this modern society is difficult. That's why those people, they went down to DC and behaved poorly. It's difficult, and we have all these people telling other people what to do, and I think we need to get pulled away a little and to have some solitude and to come up with our own senses about how we respond to the stimulus of this new world. And I think it could start with more humility, more of, I'm not sure I'm right about that. Like right now, I'm not sure I'm right about what I'm telling you guys. I think I'm hopeful that I'm right, but I'm not going to stand there and tell you you're wrong in your opinion. I don't know. So I hope that opens the discussion.
You were right on. You were right on. It's never too late to do the right thing. Okay. And what can we all do together? I mean, maybe it's a pie in the sky to make the world a better place within which to live and raise a family with respect and tolerance for everyone. We didn't have that in the past year. We're starting to see it now. Look at the diversity of the Biden administration. Look at that diversity. It's incredible. This Department of Justice and what happened to the previous administration, his Department of Justice ran like hell, to be honest, to get out of there. Mr. Barr, ran right, just left. So it can only maybe get better with respect and dignity and the morals of those involved.
But isn't that going to require leadership? I mean, gentlemen, isn't that going to require leadership from somewhere? Because you can't do that necessarily bottom up. I think individually we understand that, and that's how we probably accord what we do. But if you're talking about if you're talking about international, and certainly, Norm, you've been in that world in terms of the international pieces and those interactions, doesn't it take leadership by person or a person with whom people feel some affinity towards, some respect towards, and leadership? So, Steve, can we get to where you want to just by the three of us thinking about it, or do you need some positive leadership in that direction?
I think what I'm getting at, Joe and Norm, and I also want to thank Roy's in the background trying to help with the technical aspect of the show. But I think what I'm grappling with is the fabric of society and whether or not that is a fertile area as it's constituted now to make better decisions. And I think it needs to be, we need to fertilize that culture in ways that are not, that won't harm or won't make a case for one versus the other. If I come on and say Republicans are dumb, or if I say Democrats are dumb, either one, I'm feeding this very infertile fabric of discourse that it won't help. So how do we say get people to have public discourse that has respect at its roots and a real drive to unearth more information with questions than with assertions?
Yeah, I hear you saying that, Steve, and I'm just going to keep poking the bear on this particular question on who is going to get the society to go there. Now, in contrast, you have MSNBC and you have Fox. there, that you can't be, and probably put CNN on that side. How are we going to get folks to be if you put those two programs up there and watch it, you wouldn't even think you're talking about the same subject matter. So my sense is I'm still at the point, sounds, I won't say Pollyannish, but it doesn't sound somewhat unrealistic until we can address how those who will pontificate, and I think Norm hit it on the head. Washington is different from the rest of the country. It's its own type of beast. So my sense is I still want to hear from us. How do we think that we can get to that nirvana that I hear you speaking about, Steve? Norm, I see you wanted to speak.
Well, as a human being, I find that in my social circle now, and unfortunately, I don't want to argue with people who are still Trump supporters. I can't. I'm on Facebook. I dropped a lot of friends. I dropped some friends, where I live. No, not drop them. I would still be cordial to them. I'm a person with feelings and emotions, but they can't tell me how wonderful everything is in the past 4 years when all we got is lies. And I want to reach a point where we can come together as one. I want to reach that point. I don't like looking at someone and having that feeling of they don't know what they're talking about, and they're trying to push that everything was wonderful, because many people think it's just all about me and all the millionaires who are getting advantaged personally by the tax bills. And Mr. Biden, it's stated that he wants everyone to do well. And yet Trump just took care of the wealthy people. What did he do for Black people? What did he do for gay, LGBT people? What did he do for others? And I cannot answer with an open mind. And I'm not looking at my stage of life to make enemies, but I want everyone to prosper health-wise and what have you. Steve, I see exactly where you're coming from. And I get pissed off at some of the reaction from these new Republicans.
Well, let me ask Steve a question. Remember, all of us. Do you think, Steve, that Biden is at least moving us in the direction of where you think we ought to be as American citizens in this society? Is he, as from your perspective, beginning to move us in that direction, or trying to move us in that direction?
So it's a great question, and I would like to answer it by saying, I think as a person who believes in law and order and the safety of nationalism, I think there is some. I think extreme would be, when you're extremely national, then that can cause a problem, like as was in Hitler's Germany, for instance. So that is too much nationalism. But taking nationalism in a sort of stride, I think we need to support President Biden. We need to say, look, we don't need to undermine and undercut what he's doing. That said, what are the metrics we might use to make a consideration or an assessment of what he's doing, as opposed to saying, sort of take me at my faith. He's doing well or he's not doing well. I don't want that. I think I want to say, what are the metrics? If we're going to talk about unemployment, for instance, then is 4% a number that we can use as a goal? And if the Biden administration in 2 years reaches 4% unemployment, as opposed to roughly 6 now, then, and I'm not sure of my numbers, so please, anyone can step in and say, no, that number is incorrect. I think that's close. Then I would say we can turn around in 2 years and say, what a great job the Biden team, President Biden's team has done on unemployment. And then we can go through this, at least on the categories that have metrics associated. We cannot be posturing and polarizing. We can say, here's the numbers that we're going to use, and we're going to say, if this administration, this wonderful administration, people giving up their time and working hard for the government can achieve this, then that is what we need to stand for and behind, and our country will be better for it. And I think where the people lost some of the country's momentum in the past was when they directly contradicted what the President Trump's administration was trying to do, and they were not nationalist enough. So I would call upon anyone to stand behind what the president's doing. And the other thing, you can't avoid this. We talked a little bit about the insurrection, so-called, and I even wrote this in my book, Joe, about I play with football with the father-son league, and the kids, the younger guys, when they'd lose at the end, and it was a call, like a referee call, and they'd complain, "Oh, we would have won that game if it was called right," and we would always say, "Win by 20 or shut the hell up," and that's it. And I think that Trump should have come to that game. Come on, learn. To say that everything was rigged, no, you didn't win by 20, and that's all I needed to know. So, and I think that really hurt the country.
Well, I always said we wouldn't be, but I have to take, I got to take some issue with what you, Stevie, my good friend, on this in terms of fine. As I said, we did the program back in 2017 on the first 100 days of Trump administration. And if we would look at that, what was stated then and now, the metrics are in there. And I don't want to rehash what I believe he failed to do, et cetera. We already know there's been sufficient basis around that there was no rampant fraud with regards to the election. But I think that the way that we want to do a metric, let's start in this manner. Let's take one of the major issues that the Biden administration was faced with was COVID. We're still in it. We had COVID since March of 2020, which was during the previous administration, and have it. We now have about 58% of the adult of the population of the United States has been treated. Our economy was affected. You can't measure the economy when it was so decimated in terms of last year. But let's talk about that. Let's talk. How do you think the administration has performed in addressing the pandemic? Let's take that as a measure. You think they've done well, or they have not done so well?
Go ahead, Norm.
Okay. What they have done when Biden first started was he said within the first 100 days, to be 1 million, vaccinated or so on and so forth. I don't remember the right number, but he is more than doubled that. And Dr. Fauci, Anthony Fauci, if you look at the results from his board, the CDC, and so on and so forth, they couldn't wait for Trump to leave. And I remember the time, it was just a figure of speech, but it was in his mind. If you ingest bleach and put a light bulb up your tail, it'll go away, or everything is a hoax, or it'll be gone by April. Do not lie to the public, because we are not stupid. And that bothered me. The economy. Oh, the stock market is going to go to hell in the first, 15, 20 days. Well, it didn't. It didn't. And this country has gained face, has gained popularity with the European Union, with the United Nations. We dropped out of the Paris Accord with Trump. We're back in with Biden. What can we do to make the world better? The climate change issue. People aren't stupid. Eventually, they're going to understand the right thing. And neighbors, I think race relations have certainly improved. Those of us who were alive during the early 60s and what have you, and saw what happened. And our guts were kind of ripped out, and how they were treated. have seen a light at the end of the tunnel. And it is so important. And I feel that in Biden's first 100 days, my God, I sleep better at night. And it's the truth. I know what goes on, in the background, in the continuity of government. There's still places out there like when I was there. I know that someone is watching out for us. I personally, as a human being, feel better for the world. This COVID thing is a pandemic. It's everywhere. And this will eventually become like the flu that we have. Every year we're gonna lose, so many, what have you, shingles, flu, and what have you. But Biden is trying. He's moving forward with a positive attitude. And if you notice in the speeches he makes, and Kamala Harris, the vice president, they don't even mention his name, because he has become a non-entity in their own inner beings. I mean, he was there for 4 years, and maybe he meant well. Maybe he meant well, but I can't give him the benefit of the doubt. But as a good person, I want all of us to get along and move forward together.
Well, I would like us to talk about, and I'd like Steve to come. I want to talk about, let's move, because we're going to have to definitely come back and do some more on. Let's talk about, Steve, I would like to know your sense of, one, on how Biden's response to the COVID. I would like to know what both of you think about, because I really think there's been positive move in terms of the family plan that was put in place when they came in, or the rescue plan. I keep forgetting exactly all the names. And then lastly, I'd like to know what you think about the one, I'm going to lack of a better term, called the infrastructure plan that has yet to be put into action, but at least is being discussed at the present time. And maybe if we have time, let's talk about filibuster or not. So those four, I'm just going to throw them out and see where we go for the about 16 minutes that we have left.
Wow.
Steve, I want to get Steve in there. I want to flush him out, Norm. I want to get him on record.
I'm just getting warmed up. Go ahead, Steve.
So on record for COVID, I think it's fantastic. I mean, we're definitely moving forward. I feel I went out to eat, I think Friday night, and I felt better at the restaurant. I felt like I have 2 vaccines, or the double shots, and I think that just makes you feel very comfortable. So, and I think that a good portion of society, that's very subjective. There's a significant amount of society, or of all of us, that are vaccinated, and the more that is, the merrier. And I think President Biden's team is doing a good job with that. So that is one issue. But let me also throw back an issue that I feel like you mentioned, infrastructure. So that ties into the entire deficit spending, the unemployment, the whole infrastructure. I think we've released dogs that we have trouble controlling now, and I want to get us all of us people, all of us, to say, when you go home tonight, you don't just go open your checkbook up and start writing checks for that new Corvette, 66 Corvette, you saw it on the road, it's $35,000, it's in pristine condition, I think I'll buy it. Can't do it. Don't have that $35,000. We got to look at our balance in the checkbook. And I think that we together as a nation, all of us, have to look at that checkbook and say, okay, we're going to get some good things out of this. We have stimulus checks. Those are very important to keep people from becoming destitute. Perhaps in the Depression era, when we don't want that sort of thing to happen. But at what cost, and when do we curb that? When do we bring that back? And I think I would be most proud of President Biden's team if they could bring us back to a plan that significantly addresses the deficit while also taking care of the infrastructure. So I think I throw that out to everyone to say, how do you think that President Biden's team can bring us to that place? And then the other thing I want to get on before we go to the next time we meet would be the immigration problem, and that relates to healthcare. So first on the deficit spending, and then go to that, which is sort of, you flushed me out a little, Joe. How's that?
Yeah.
Steve,
Go
go
ahead,
ahead.
Norm. Well, just on that point, this this gets me to the conversation. You say, okay, what is the Biden administration going to do? The the Republicans have stated we're not going to have a conversation on the merits at all. Our whole thing is just let's stop it. I'm not even going to go back to. I have to reference it that when there was a tax break for the rich, no one said anything. That passed right on through. McConnell just passed that right on through. That's what happened then. So Biden has said, I'm willing to have the conversation as to how we should address this infrastructure bill. The Republicans say, I don't want to talk about it. And until we have a situation whereby we address the filibuster issue, it is almost a non-starter in the sense of that. So if we're going to talk about a government, if we go back to your earlier comments, Steve, that we're going to come together as a society and address the issues to make it better for Americans, then we're going to have a conversation across the aisle. And right now, that's not where the conversation is. So you're absolutely correct. And I think at least the Biden administration has indicated from what I've seen and heard that they're prepared to have conversations. They've invited folks from both parties to come in and talk about it. No, they haven't agreed, but that's the process that we go through. But there's resistance to even having the conversation. So the question is, how will we get there to have it without just shoving things down people's mouths? How will we get there? Norm?
Well, I'm concerned about several things. And one of it is the spending that's going on. The stimulus is excellent, but I know of someone who was, quote, stimulated with money for over $1 million who didn't need it. And he benefited. And this individual, shouldn't say he, this individual benefited from it. He got closer to, $2 million. And I just felt it was wrong. Maybe some of that should have gone in another direction. But how do you know? So some of his business was affected, by COVID. Everyone's business was affected by COVID. However, to what point and how do you measure? It's an impossibility. And poor Joe Biden is stuck there trying to do the right thing, to give the right amount to people who were deserving of this and not non-deserving. And there's a huge outflow of money. And we still have the whole infrastructure of this country to keep on going, bridges, public transportation, what have you. We're not first in the world anymore. Japan has gone by us. France, Germany has gone by us and things like this. So we have to watch the spending and put the spending in the right location or to the right.
I just asked for a clarification. I just want to, before I go to Steve, on what you mentioned about, because there were 3 stimulus packages that were given. There were 2 given during the Trump administration and then the one by the Biden administration.
Right.
And I think we had the problem as far as whether all the right people got the right amount, maybe through all 3 of those stimuli that were received. So it's not, you weren't just referencing the one given by the Biden administration. This has been throughout all 3 of those.
Exactly, Joe.
Right.
Exactly. And I'm talking about maybe the first or the second one. When I start to think of it right now, the first or the second one. It's a lot of money going on. And, President Trump figured that he was a shoo-in for election, but that's a discussion for another time. I don't want to take up, all the time here. I mean, I could go on, for hours.
Let me just ask Steve, how do you think, I think the point that you made was so salient earlier about how we can come together as a country. How do you think that we could possibly encourage that conversation across the aisle to look at things that may be for the betterment of we in the United States now. How can we get folks to have that conversation? Because right now we're on a collision course that's not going to happen. So how can we, the people, get our elected officials to get to that point? What do you think, Steve?
Well, I think we have to be more demanding of our elected officials and to ask them to be better self-monitors, um, to be able to speak without polarizing, and to use terms that do not polarize. For instance, you said the tax break for the rich. Well, I think if we understood through history what tax breaks are meant to do, they have had good success by stimulating investment, which investment occurred with people with more equity. And so they worked. So now, do I say, therefore, we have to keep doing it that way, or do we do it another way? But the idea of terming it, framing it as a tax break for the rich is not going to be enough now. I think now we have to break things down and be more specific and say, look, we want to put in programs that will stimulate the economy, and some of them are going to benefit too much of one side of this equation. So how do we have that conversation and say, look, if we do it this way, we'll have this result. We do it this way. So let's bring in 2 or 3 different ways, and let's stop with the partisan conversation and be less polarizing. And I think that will help everybody. If all of the elected officials, if we can ask them to be less polarizing in their commentary, to be higher self-monitors in how they speak, to try not to speak in terms of partisan politics, and to come to the issues that we all need solved, and show more respect. President Biden, former President Trump. It's not Trump and Biden, frankly. I feel like they've deserved for all of the work that they put in. I mean, the most powerful men, whether it's President Obama, former President Obama. And I think so we're going to bring more respect into the conversations and to work much harder in how we communicate and not be, and this goes back to education. So what are we teaching our children? Are we going to show them movies that speak down to people's ability to think? Are we going to show the kids, both in how we interact personally and the things that we display for them? For instance, there's a big debate right now with a certain re-education movement that is that has a bias that's very strong, and I think that's fine, so long as you're dealing with people who can understand bias and you can discuss the bias. I don't say that you shouldn't be able to bring that into a classroom, but how about discussing what do you think the bias of the person who presented this material is? And why do you think they got to that point? Do they have viable reasons to be wanting to present this? And I think the answer would be yes. But I think you came on the show today with a disclaimer, and that those disclaimers are important, that people say, hey, here's what I want you to know before I speak, because I don't want this floating out there without having, I think there was in baseball, there was this big problem with, it was a mostly white sport in the beginning. And then when Willie Mays came in and fantastic Robinson athletes, they were rewriting the record books and they were being ignored. And it's like, well, why were they being ignored? There was good reason, but it wasn't a good reason. Do you see what I mean? It was, yeah, we understood that they were being, but you can't do that. So how does this new, and let's get away from this thing, the woke people. That's another term that's polarizing. How about people who are trying to recognize where we've been so that we can better understand where we're going? And let's not be calling them woke, where you're just, frankly, pissing people off. Why do you do that when it takes more work? So I'll give you an example, I think a very specific example about women. We talk about people who are oppressed. Women have been oppressed. They had to fight to get a vote, to be able to right to vote. And men don't always understand this. And they, from a sports thing, they say, oh, how'd you do? Oh, we killed it. Well, that has an effect on women because we're not choosing our language with care. How about come up with something different? Like, how'd you do? Well, we stormed the castle. Okay, we didn't have to kill something. How about this old saying about I killed 2 birds with 1 stone? How about we painted 2 paintings with 1 brush? How about we get away from some of this very caustic conversation that then harms people without you trying to harm them, but you're not being aware? And so that's sort of the motion that I want us to see our culture move to. And it's not easy, by the way. It's hard to change your words in midstream and come up with some other way to communicate what you're trying to communicate. So we'll throw that out there for you guys to discuss.
You're
And
right on.
I should mention there's no lady on this board, which we want to get someone on. But go ahead.
You're still right, Steve. You hit the nail right on the head. But our discussion here is for the community of Stoke. You know your economic makeup of the town of Stoke, which is a good community. You know who lives there. This is to benefit them. We're trying to share our united experience between the three of us to benefit the town of Stoke. And I was a selectman in Sharon for 32 years, the longest in recorded history. 32 years. And my words, as I mentioned before, was what can we all do together to make it a better place to live and to raise your families? And it's the same thing for Stoke. And I think we should aim towards that. We're looking for voting rights. We're looking at other things coming up. And this can't be accomplished in one discussion.
Well, you know what? Again, I keep coming back to it. Yes, we will come back because we have now we have 4 programs, Norm and Steve, that we're going to have to do because we'll have more than 100 days to look at in terms of to do that metrics. And I think, Steve's absolutely correct. Once performance, all of us get performance in the work that we do. But I think this you hit a good chord, Steve, in the sense of we have to deal with the civility issue.
Exactly.
And I, having gotten to know you over the years that I have, which have probably been about the past 12 years or so, and to read some of your writings and how sensitive you have presented issues which have been challenging to yourself, if we can be somewhat introspective and not to use hurting words. See, that's what you're talking about. When you're talking about using hurting words, because I can make the statement, and for me, I'm respectful. Just like I said with Norm, I respect Norm's serving in terms of the CIA. I may not agree with everything that the CIA may have done. Listen, I'm learned in the sense of my readings, but I respect Norm for his public service. I respect you, Steve, as a good businessman, a sensitive individual, and an author in terms of what you're doing and what you're giving back by what we do by doing this community forum. And each of you, even though I've just met Norm, respect the work that I do. I may come with a different perspective, but what I point out is I'm willing to agree to disagree without being disagreeable. And I think that's where we are. So we have a minute in order to do this. And so therefore, Norm, I'm going to let you have before I wrap and thank all the people. And I think I probably have to now, because if I go over, Roy is going to have a mark on that. So I want to be able to say before in closing, it's always great to be with you, Steve. Norm, we're going to come back, and it's great to have met you on this program and for us to come back. Certainly want to thank all of the folks behind the scenes that work to make this program possible. Roy Cohen, our executive producer, Rob, who does the editing of if we need to edit anything out, and nothing has to be edited today. We've done such a great job. To Michael Hammond, to Mr. Young and others who were there at the studio. Just want to say thank you so much in allowing us to do this. We're going to have to close the program. I want to thank our viewing audience. Hopefully we've imparted some views today, but we're going to come back and do more because we want to look at the Biden administration from its 100 days to look at those metrics that Steve talked about. So gentlemen, thank you for being on the program this morning. Steve, Norm, we'll do this again. I bid you well. Have a great rest of the week.
Thank you.